Well, that was a lot of fun, wasn't it?
Yeah.
How are you this Saturday afternoon? No, Saturday evening. How are you? And welcome everybody to the Scarif Scuttlebutt podcast. Scarif Live.
I'm fantastic. How are you?
Good. I wanted to briefly make a quick comment. Last week we had a couple of folks on the show, and we had a really great discussion.
Yeah.
Um, with social media, everybody is chiming in as far as what their opinions are on some of the new Star Wars shows. We are definitely not a stranger to that. We love what we love, and we don't love what we don't love, and we kind of posed that question last week. And really, it was because you had watched. What did you watch? You
Who's
watched
the
some.
acolyte?
It was Star Wars, watching Star Wars with kids, right? And
Yeah.
what remind the folks how you came up with that topic for last week.
Yeah. So we posed a question online on X, uh, Twitter, if you will. Is it time to lower our standards, or do we have impossibly high standards for Star Wars? And where that came from, I was watching episodes. I don't know, it must have been around episode 6 or so, 5 or 6 of The Acolyte, and I was watching it with my son, who's 10. And while I'm kind of cringing in my head, trying to keep a straight face, he's thoroughly enjoying the show. So I'm like, are we judging this too harshly? Do we have impossibly high standards for this franchise? Are we never going to be happy? Because here's a little kid, and he reminded me of when I was a kid and I was enjoying Star Wars.
Sure.
So I'm like, like honestly, and do we have impossibly high standards for Star Wars? We posed the question on Twitter and got some great responses, and then we just talked about it last week, and we had a really great discussion.
Yeah, it was really great. We had a lot of chatter in the chat as well. Some very and then we some messages too. We had some great messages regarding the discussion. As you know, we're not a podcast that yells at the clouds for the most part. We like to take topics and kind of break them down from a more sensical, if that's a word, perspective, honest with our takes, but also don't talk down to other fans that might not have the same opinions on some of the shows that we do. But it was really great to have a discussion kind of all across the board. I mean, obviously we are we use the term Star Wars family, and we are kind of a Star Wars family where the fandom is one of the reasons, obviously, we started the podcast, just to talk to other fans. But really, really great feedback from that episode on YouTube. If you guys find it, last week was great. We recorded it, and we pegged it as our 200th episode. Obviously, I think it was a fantastic topic. Yeah.
It's going to be our 200th.
What are some of the things that you walked away learning from that discussion? Not only from the panel, which we had like 9 people on the panel, but there were some really, really great points that were made in the chat as well. What were your takeaways from that episode?
First of all, I love the diversity that we had in opinions. Now, there was a general consensus. Our opinions, or our standards, are not too high for Star
Right.
Wars, for the whole franchise. Kind of a consensus on that. I don't know if we had any dissenting voices on Twitter that you might remember, but general consensus that our standards are exactly what they should be, and it's almost dangerous to kind of a slippery slope to lower your standards. But I was happy that even though there's a consensus for that, individual opinions differed. For the different Star Wars stories and characters, and I like some of the points that brought up. Talking about the Last Jedi versus the Rise of Skywalker. Really love the point of maybe from an artistic standpoint, the Last Jedi is a better film than the Rise of Skywalker, but from a Star Wars lore perspective, the Rise of Skywalker is much better than the Last Jedi. And we're still reeling years later from what the Last Jedi did to the fandom. So it was great to hear all these different opinions, and to see where everybody was coming from. Everybody had their standards. Which movie set the standard for you. I'm glad we had some that were original trilogy, some that were prequel, and some that were even Disney Star Wars.
Sure.
I mentioned Rogue One as the standard bearer for a good Star Wars film, and there were others. There was someone mentioned Andor as the standard. I love how there were so many differing opinions, and we could discuss them all, respectfully.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a really great discussion. Again, something that we strive to do here on the show. And not just wave your fist and say I don't like it, but if you don't like it, tell us why, and then
Right.
we might agree, we might not. But yeah, fantastic. So quick announcements. Tell us a little bit what's going on with some of our other channels here at the Red 5 Network. You've got Red 5 Tavern. You guys are into a new campaign.
Oh yeah, and yours truly has gotten the chance to DM for a couple episodes. I run things the way I want to run things. I like to do the psychological thriller type deal. So I've gotten the opportunity to run a couple of those, but we'll be back to Charles running the show next week. He does a fantastic job as the dungeon master. So yeah, big stuff. He just started the new campaign a few weeks ago, and I get to play on there as well. So really excited for where the Red 5 Tavern is going.
Excellent. And Nicole from Used and Abused podcast, she is doing a phenomenal job running the Red 5 Reading Club. If you guys are wanting to join a club and discuss some Star Wars books, the Red 5 Reading Club is wonderful. They've got a what do you call it? Discord. I don't do Discord, and it's not even in my head. But yeah, some great streams and discussions. They are doing the Chuck Wendig Aftermath books right now. They I think they just finished doing the original Thrawn trilogy. I was a little bit part of that, so those are great books. Can't wait to see what else they do. I think I didn't finish the Wendig books. I think I just read like the first book and a half.
I did. I forced myself. That's back when I could force myself to trudge through a book, even if I didn't like it. I don't do that anymore. If I don't like a book anymore, I don't try it to read the whole thing. But sure. I'll be happy to add another book to the reading list today with our guests today as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Talking about lore, Star Wars has been around for quite some time now, and time and time again we see that there are new voices being added to the mix, new lore that comes in, new stories, new characters. As of this week, we had some new images come out from People Magazine, some exclusive interviews and images on the new Skeleton Crew, which I'm sure in December your kids and you will be watching that, right?
Yep.
But Star Wars has been, lauded as a dead franchise, but we keep talking about it, and we keep getting new Star Wars. So, which is it?
Are we saying life support at this point, or is it too premature for life support?
No, I think it's too premature. But yeah, it's there's a lot of stories out there to kind of keep track of, and it's funny because when the Ahsoka series came out, obviously, a lot of people said the Ahsoka series was kind of like Rebels 2.0, Rebels in live action. Obviously I agree. There's a lot of characters that made their appearance live action wise from that series. But what do you think of all the stories coming out? And then really, it would be such a monumental task to kind of organize all the stories, all the canon, even the non-canon stuff. I mean, it's a monumental task.
Yeah, and something I can't wait to discuss tonight, and we've sort of talked about this before. It seems like nowadays you need the extra literature to tell the full story of what's going on, like the road to the Last Jedi and all these other books that they've had. Like, you don't, like in the movies, you don't get the full story anymore. You have to read the extra stuff. I miss it because, back in the day, we like to call it the dark times for Star Wars, but we had all these books that came out that told independent stories that stood on their own. And I'd like to talk about that. What's the responsibility of literature, Star Wars literature these days?
Yeah, and it's funny because I mean, with a franchise this old, you would think that one story does kind of relate to maybe a story that was told years ago or whatever. But it's an expansive galaxy. It's an expansive literal galaxy to say the least.
Yeah.
There are characters that overlap, and obviously in the real world, just like one story might affect something here. It's amazing. It's a daunting task for anyone that might want to, start becoming a Star Wars fan. There's a lot there to sink your teeth in. But I would hope that it wouldn't dissuade any new fans from coming in. I think, for the most part, the more the merrier. But I also think it's up to us older fans to kind of help usher new fans and show them around the galaxy, if you will. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it could be a daunting thing trying to get into the literature and stuff like that. If people ask for a recommendation, give it to them. Whatever your favorite
Sure.
was,
Yeah.
throw whether it be the Thrawn trilogy, as you mentioned, the original, the real one, or the tales from from Jabba's palace, or whatever the case may be. Whatever
Sure.
your favorite was back in the day, tell them get them hooked on that. Like, get excited about whatever that is, and then say, hey, let's read this. That's why I'm glad you mentioned Red 5 reading. That's a good way to get people reading together. You might want to go back and dust off the book and read it again yourself. Kind of reignite the fire. Remember why you actually love the Star Wars franchise. So
absolutely. And speaking of Star Wars books, our guest tonight, we'll bring him out in a minute. Trevor, Davey, the definitive Star Wars Legends timeline. Even that name sounds daunting.
Yeah. I'm here for it.
But some of the questions that we've got for him obviously deal with what the process was, how daunting of a task that was to kind of compile all of that. But we are looking forward to bringing Trevor out. Fantastic. Are you ready for your questions, Brad?
Yeah, except for whatever that dinghy is. I have no idea what that is.
Wow.
This is what happens when you do a live show.
Absolutely. All right. Well, while Brad figures out his dinghy, we'll what is that?
I have no idea.
Sounds like some sort of
good
device.
thing you can edit out later, and they'll be like, "What noise? There was no noise.
What noise? There was no noise." Well, while you figure out your dinghy, why don't I push a couple of buttons and let's bring Trevor out?
I've been years trying to figure out my dinghy is.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe.
Trevor, thank you very much. Don't hold it against us.
Hello.
Situation.
It's a low budget operation.
Welcome, Trevor, to the Scarif Scuttlebutt podcast live edition this weekend. And you are in the UK, correct?
I am indeed. I'm in a very sunny West Wales.
Oh, very nice, very nice. Brad, have you been there? Have you been?
I've been the thanks to the Navy. I've been to Portsmouth, England, and that's it.
I'm a bit of a way from there.
Yeah, just a little bit.
In our terms, not in like Texas terms.
Yeah. We were supposed to take a trip over to London, but we just ended up drinking at a pub the entire time, and everybody was buying us drinks there. So we ended up staying in Portsmouth the entire time. And I'm fine.
Can't argue with that.
Yeah.
Very
they
nice.
start drinking like at 9 o'clock in the morning, so it really worked out well.
Wow, that's great. That's great. Trevor, again, thank you so much for making time to hang out with us and talk about your book. It's when I first saw you post about it, just again, I joked around about it before the break there. The title alone gave me the heebie-jeebies to be able to corral the entire Star Wars timeline, the Legends timeline. It's quite a task. What was that process like?
So, a little kind of history / introduction about me is I can't remember a time when I wasn't obsessed with Star Wars. I'm 47. I was born in 76. As a kid, had the toys, had the bedspread, the toothbrush, the curtains, the wallpaper, the works. I can't remember the first time I ever seen any of the films. They were just inherent in my life from day one. And also the books. I was reading the books as soon as they came out. So I've always been obsessed by this stuff. I've always maintained timelines. I think I first started my own kind of timeline Excel spreadsheet when Crimson Empire came out, because before that it was pretty obvious. Thrawn trilogy happens 5 years after you have the Jedi Academy trilogy, and the books came out and it was always, we're 1 year after that, we're 2 years after that. It was pretty simple. But then when Crimson Empire came out, you start getting flashbacks to the events of Dark Empire, and you're also talking books and then comics. And so I started keeping my own timelines, and then 4 years ago I became I got kind of hired by Utini.com to maintain their timeline, both canon and legends, and that was a lot of fun, kind of getting it to what we see on the website. But it's very basic, it's not broken down, it's this story here, this story here. And then I went to Star Wars Celebration in Anaheim 2 years ago, and the official Star Wars Timelines book had been announced, and we had a booth to kind of promote the website, and one of the authors of that book came up and said, "Oh yeah, I've heard of you guys. We've looked at your website. We've looked at your timeline." And at that point, I was in a corner hyperventilating. That's massive. Sure. And I came away from there and went, okay, I've got my timeline. I've released my spreadsheets onto the internet for years, but I want to do something big. I'm going to commit to this now. I'm going to make the only timeline you would ever need in as detailed manner as I could possibly manage. And then I spent 2 years doing exactly that, breaking every book down chapter by chapter, comics page by page, flashbacks, in-universe documents, everything you could ever need.
Wow. I've discovered that a lot of us Star Wars fans are a little OCD. It seems like it helps.
Yeah, it really does.
I'm excited to even just to hear about this, because what it reminds me of, I got this excited when I first got my hands on Steve Sansweet's Star Wars Encyclopedia.
Yes.
Back in the, I think it was the late 90s. And we were lucky enough to have Steve on the show a couple of years back now. But that was, when that was like pretty much getting your hands on the Bible for the first time. And just, being able to like, all these characters that are mentioned in your favorite stories. So I'm pretty excited for this as well. Just like that feeling.
Yeah. Trevor, I wanted to ask you, obviously we're all, we hear the term lifelong Star Wars fan, and for a lot of people, it spans decades, but obviously we are of the age, we see a little gray in all of our beard.
Just a little.
What is it about, I'm going to ask you a general question, I guess. What is it about Star Wars that you think continues to have fans just continue to talk about it? Why has it stayed in the pop culture arena?
So for me personally, I think that we of a similar age, like we just said, we all had that. Star Wars made that impression on all of us as kids. It's the reason why we all do what we do. It's the reason why our bookshelves and our walls all look like they do. And those people now are making Star Wars. So they're translating what Star Wars meant to them onto the page, onto the screen, into the comic, into the video game. And that's why we're seeing such a resurgence now post sort of Disney buyout, because we're getting all this again. We saw it in the 90s, because kind of all the authors, the people in the 90s who were creating Star Wars, they were kind of 20 years older than we are now, because they had that same impression, and they were at that point in their careers where they got invited and got given those opportunities to create in that universe. But what we're seeing now are the kids who were introduced to it. You know, there's people now who weren't even born when Star Wars was released, and their first introduction might have been the expanded universe, and now it's come full circle. You know, the overall impact of Star Wars is undeniable and inarguable and clear to everyone. What we're seeing now, you know, nearly 50 years later, is the impact on pop culture continuing. You know, no franchise has ever had such an impact on pop culture. And what happens when that impact is seen 50 years on? Well, this is what we get now.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, you talk about Star Wars being this old. I mean, you know, there are other franchises too. I mean, I make reference to Star Trek a lot. There are, you know, a ton of James Bond movies, but
Oh,
you know,
absolutely.
just something about Star Wars, that magic, that
nothing changed the world like Star Wars did, because it did change the world.
Oh, absolutely.
It changed what pop culture was. It changed things like computer effects, digital effects, all about, you know, the foundation of ILM, Skywalker sound, Pixar. You know, it cannot be underestimated how much that one movie changed everything.
So last week on Scarif Live, we were talking about, you know, setting the standard for Star Wars. So I wanted to pose one of those questions to you that we discussed last week and actually expand on it a little bit. And the question was, which Star Wars film for you sets the standard for, you know, premium Star Wars content? And then in addition, just, you know, based on your book, which piece of Star Wars literature for you sets the standard for Star Wars literature?
Oh, that's two big questions there. So the first question about what sets a standard is so multifaceted, because we look back at A New Hope now, and some of the effects are pretty shoddy. You know, there's always that one clip where the lasers hit the Death Star and it just looks out of sync with the rest of the movie. You know, there's a couple of clips that have never been enhanced through special editions or whatever, but the heart of a film still stands very, very strong. You know, and Empire Strikes Back is pretty much flawless. But then you look at Return of the Jedi, and you know, there's some very ropey effects. You've got the Ewoks, which a lot of people don't like. I love the Ewoks. I'm a massive fan of a cartoon and the Ewok movies, everything. I'm literally obsessed with those little guys. So the standards vary over time, and I think it's a risk to hold the original trilogy on such a pedestal without admitting some of these flaws for those three films have. And then obviously the prequels came out. A lot of criticism about them. I think Phantom Menace is great. I think that's a standard we should be holding Star Wars to. Then you have the sequels come out. Force Awakens, I think, is a perfectly good, serviceable Star Wars film. I think Last of the Jedi, for me, is a masterpiece of filmmaking. And then I think my honest opinion is that the saga was done a disservice by Rise of Skywalker. If you're trying to close out a 9-film saga, maybe do it a little better than that. So when we talk about the standards, you know, the standards need to be whatever is being put in front of us at any one time. In the kind of live action era, we've, again, such a dichotomy. You've got Mando, which is basically a comic book on screen, which is great. You've got Andor, which is, again, a masterpiece as far as I'm concerned. I think that's an incredible piece of art. Ahsoka, which for me is possibly the most disappointing Star Wars content we've seen. But again, not from a story point of view, but more from a creative decision in its kind of direction point of view. And then The Acolyte, which I felt was unnecessarily divisive because it was brave and it was ambitious and it did something that Star Wars hasn't done before. And surely that's the standard that we want. We want to see a Star Wars that hasn't been done before. We don't want to see A New Hope over and over again. I think The Acolyte did that. I think Andor did that. I think The Last Jedi did that. I think Rogue One did that. And that's what I'd like to see more of. I want my Star Wars to challenge me and show me something that I haven't already seen. Because if I want something I've already seen, I'll go and see the next Marvel movie.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So just to follow, but before we get to the literature part of the
Sorry, that was a really long answer.
Yeah, no, that was a fantastic
Perfect,
answer.
yeah.
That was the kind of discussion we were having last week, and I loved it. So thank you for that. But because we're talking a lot about lore today, you mentioned The Acolyte, and I like what you're saying as far as, and Ro and I discussed this before. We wanted to love The Acolyte because it was going to be new content. We're always here for new content. But from a lore perspective, obviously the stuff came up about Ki-Adi-Mundi and the fact that his age changed. According to the official or unofficial, whatever it is, legends it is on there now. He wasn't born for another 7 years, but now he's older. How much do you think that they should? Is the lore malleable, or should they stick to and honor the previous lore?
So yeah, you've got this kind of contrast between legends and canon, but what we've got to understand is when the timeline was reset, nothing carried over. Obviously they carried over a lot, because why would you invent a new ship, a new planet, a new species when you've got all this work from a West End game source books and from all the novels? You don't need to invent all of these new planets and creatures. But if they want to say now that Syrians are a longer age species than was previously established, and that Ki-Adi-Mundi now was born in a different year to what was previously established, there's nothing stopping them doing that. And to say that anything was, this whole thing about canon was broken, law was broken, well, it wasn't, because it's new. We have to acknowledge the split, and things may come over, things may not. You've got to remember, in the same show, we had, Ki-Adi-Mundi is now a species that can live a couple of 100 years, where before it was assumed that wasn't the case. But in that same show, we got Plagueis. So some things aren't going to come over as they were. Other things, be thankful we got Plagueis.
Not enough. We didn't.
Season two.
Yeah. All right. So you're not going to get out of answering the second part of the question. Which piece of Star Wars literature sets the standard for you?
Okay. Are you essentially asking me what my favorite Star Wars book is?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay. My favorite Star Wars book is X-Wing Starfighters of Adumar.
Oh, wow.
By Aaron Alston, which is the 9th book, the 10th book in the X-Wing series, but it's standalone because it's the funniest Star Wars book that's ever been written. It's absolutely hilarious. It's Wedge and Hobby and Jansen and Tico on their own little adventure, and it's laugh out loud funny. It really is. There's no galaxy shattering stakes, but it's written so well. You've grown to love these characters because it's quite late in the kind of legends. It's early 2000s, late 2000s.
Oh, wow.
So you've got these tie-ins to the books, the dozens of books that we've already read. And it's just genius. There's a fantastic scene where the guys have to kind of get through customs on this one planet. and they're all dressed in Hawaiian shirts and acting like rednecks to try and fit in, and it all just goes terribly wrong. It's honestly a masterpiece. It really is. But most of Aaron Olson's books were.
Nice.
Well, don't talk to Ro about that, because he doesn't like any humor.
I was going to say, I was going to say, ooh, comedy in my Star Wars. I love it.
Yeah.
But it's not written as comedy. It's written like a buddy cop movie. It's, you know, it's if you're with your best mates in, you know, if you were in the Navy, if you were in the Air Force,
Sure.
and the guys who you'd served with for decades, you've got that bond, you've got that camaraderie, and it's written like that. It's not written for jokes, but it's written how these people would take the mick out of each other constantly.
Sure. Wow. Yeah, that's too funny. I wanted to ask you a question. You mentioned how Star Wars affects different people in different ways, and obviously now we are getting a lot of Star Wars through either the comics, the games, new movies are coming out, new series are coming out. Obviously, you know, it's I think because Star Wars affects so many of us in different ways, whether it's messaging, whether it's career choices, the stories, the characters. I mean, obviously there's a plethora of other ways that Star Wars inspires us. There are so many voices, so many projects out there. I wanted to ask you, and obviously because Star Wars has been around, you know, we're coming up on 50 years, basically, you know, soon. What are your thoughts about maintaining Star Wars fresh? What can Star Wars do, either continue to do or maybe start to do, to make sure that we as fans usher Star Wars into the next 50 years?
I think those conversations must have been happening over the last 10 years or so, because we're seeing that those things are happening. The High Republic publishing initiative, you know, massive, absolutely massive. I've been to a couple of High Republic panels at the last two Star Wars celebrations, and the fervor, the passion in those panels was absolutely insane. Like something I've not seen in the Star Wars fandom for a long time. The age of those fans was a lot younger. They've probably only seen the movies. They haven't read all these books. But something about the way the High Republic has been written, something about that era has really, really grabbed people's attentions. And that's really satisfying. Again, it's the ambition, it's the drive, it's giving something new. And, you know, for you know, people who like the original trilogy, we've still got that continuation in The Mandalorian. We're still seeing that. We are going to get that peak Jedi Luke Skywalker series one day. 100% that's going to happen, whether it's in animated form or not. It's going to happen because that's an era that has to be explored. But to see all these other offshoots as well. So like your question, like you asked, what that next 50 years is going to look like, we're seeing it. We're seeing all these different angles already. I honestly can't imagine a single other franchise that has been as bold as Star Wars over the last 10 years. Not always successfully.
Sure.
But if you look at not the competitors, but its contemporaries, if you look at what Marvel has done with a lot of its movies and live action shows over the last 5 years, they've never reached the heights of kind of Avengers Endgame. It's all become a bit muddled. Obviously, we've got COVID and strikes and all that sort of stuff. You look at Star Trek, they tend to be doing a few different things. Nobody is being as ambitious as Star Wars, and they're not always going to hit. But as long as they keep throwing, enough will hit with enough different people. And that's kind of a point. That's how you keep a franchise going.
Yeah.
So, you know, based off what you said previously, I think I probably know the answer to this. So if that Rogue Squadron movie ever does happen, I don't know where it went, somewhere.
Yeah, I don't think that exists.
Yeah. So if it were to happen, you would be okay if it varied pretty significantly from what we call source material.
100% because of that split.
Yeah.
Legends and canon are two different things.
Yeah.
There is no way to shoehorn them together. If we take the Clone Wars animated show, when that launched, Disney hadn't bought Star Wars. We still only had the expanded universe. Try as you might, the Clone Wars show is never going to fit with the expanded universe and the way they told the story of the Clone Wars between 2002 2005. It does not fit. You cannot make a square peg fit in a round hole.
Right.
And the only person you're going to upset by trying to make it fit is yourself. So you kind of have to accept that there are three different Star Wars timelines. There is the expanded universe Legends timeline. There is the canon timeline, which includes the Clone Wars. And then there's that weird Clone Wars timeline before Disney bought Star Wars.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to get back to your book, and I wanted to ask you, when you were going back, you said you spent a couple of years going through all the stuff. Was there something that what was the thing that you really enjoyed, reading again? And what was some of the exciting things you may have actually learned that maybe might be new to us, even who read quite a bit of the expanded universe? What were some cool Easter eggs and stuff you may have found while you're going back and doing your research?
So one of the most enjoyable parts for me was when it works, when it actually fits, because, a lot of these stories are written decades apart, but I broke the movies down day by day. I broke certain books down day by day. I broke certain years down month by month. And I've backed it all up with footnotes and kind of discussion and analysis, so you can read my workings out, like your math teacher might have said.
Right.
And there'll be times where you'd come across something and you'd be like, that really, really fits. I don't know why, but it fits. If you actually read things in the order I've put out, it works. And then I'd work on something like the Marvel comics. Now, the Marvel comics historically never fitted well with the expanded universe when it launched with the Throne trilogy, because they weren't trying to reference those events. And I'm working my way through these to try and make them fit. And even the final sort of 10 issues or so, there's a real sort of conflict between them. And then I kind of made the bold decision to go, well, actually, if you read, for example, I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head. If you read 104 before 103, the story flows a lot better because they were written out of sync and there was publishing delays. It kind of gave me a feeling that that's actually the order they were written and supposed to happen in, but they just weren't released in that order. And every other timeline will have them strictly in that. That's the release order. That's what we need to stick to. But if you want to make it work as a timeline, sometimes you need to make these changes. And that's what I want the book to really portray is, yes, I make some kind of bold assertions and assumptions, but it makes the story flow better, which is the entire point. As for surprises, my most surprising discovery was that the Star Wars Connect video game had a campaign mode. I thought it was this stupid dance-off video game that came out for the Xbox, and it had a campaign mode. It had a story mode. But that story mode was so conflicting. It kind of spanned all the years between, 13 years between Phantom Menace and Revenge of the Sith into a couple of weeks, and trying to spread that and make that fit, because I didn't want to leave anything out. That's why I could, put my heart on my sleeve and call it definitive. I couldn't cherry pick which stories I was going to include, so I had to include it. But at least then I can put something in my footnotes saying, even though they've just completed this mission and Mace Windu has just talked about the events of the Phantom Menace, And now they're somehow in the Battle of Coruscant. We just have to assume there was a big gap where it's not referenced.
Wow. Was that the one with the wands and stuff? With the motion sensor?
No, that was the Wii. The Kinect one was like those dance-off video games where you have the mat.
Oh, okay.
It was one of those where you could do a dance-off, and they had things like Gwen Stefani's Hollaback Girl and loads of other famous songs, but with new Star Wars lyrics. It's the most random Star Wars video game outside of maybe Super Bombad Racing.
You talk about making it when it fits well, and I use one of my favorite moments from Episode 3 is when Obi-Wan and Anakin are talking on Coruscant, and we talking about how many times he saved his hide, and he's like, 9th time that business on I think it was Cato Nemodia, that doesn't count. And I love that part because it's a nod to James Lucino's book, which now we put into Legends. But that was something that was in that book, and George Lucas wanted to give a nod. Labyrinth of Evil, I think was the name of the book, and so George Lucas wanted to put that on there.
So Labyrinth of Evil again was a really exciting part of this book for me, because you don't just have the events of Revenge of the Sith and the Labyrinth of Evil book. You've also got Reversal of Fortune webcomics. You've just got stuff going on in the Republic Commando books. You've got all these things that are happening at the same time. To get the full story, like you were talking about earlier, in order to get the full story, you have to read all these books and comics. If you want the full story of what leads into the Battle of Coruscant, you're going to have to read 4 or 5 different things. But you don't need that, because what you see on the screen is great, and you can just enjoy it for what it is. But if you really want to dive into what was going on with the Separatists and what was going on with Obi-Wan and Anakin beforehand in the days leading up to it, there's a lot to unpick.
Sure. You mentioned video games and comic books and stuff like that. Some of the sources that you relied on to compile this, were there any other obscure sources that really surprised you that you used to compile your timeline?
Nothing that I wasn't already familiar with. There wasn't anything I discovered while I was doing it, because I was aware of it all already. But the level that I've gone into, whether it is every single vignette or short story from the West End Games role-playing books, the little vignettes that were only ever published on SciShowToys.com that celebrated their mythos statuettes from the early 2000s, the Ewok comics that were published by Star Comics, which was an offshoot of Marvel. Trying to think now what other obscure. My favorite one that I discovered not long before I started this book, so maybe 3 years ago, the video game Lethal Alliance, which came out for the Sony PSP and the Nintendo DS. On their website, they had an in-universe communication from Grand Moff Tarkin that related to the events of a video game, but also the mobile video game Tiny Death Star. It's amazing what you can find if you really, really look.
Wow. I mean, monumental task. And before Brad jumps in, I'm going to ask you a quick question. Your favorite Star Wars character in Legends that is not part of the canon, and why?
Oh, okay, that's tough, because my favorite Star Wars character in general is Luke, who's obviously come over. So for a Legends exclusive character, oh wow, okay. Off the very top of my head, I think I'm gonna have to go for Viger, simply because Traitor is my second favorite Star Wars book, and those messy conversations about the nature of the Force and the Jedi is what I live for.
Yeah.
Oh no, I was about to say Jackson, but he has come into canon.
Yeah, he's
right.
Yeah, he's got there. Yeah, I was just going to say, what you were discussing before about all the different sources. I think one source a lot of people forget is Star Wars Insider. I haven't read in a while, but I don't know if they still do it. But I used to have amazing short stories.
Yeah, still doing it, but they've been on I think we're on the sort of third wave of High Republic tie-ins. They stepped out of that last year, and we did a load of, I think it was called Galactic Tales, which were all prequel era based short stories. So yeah, that's still going strong.
So you mentioned, I got to go back to this. You mentioned Luke as your favorite character, and you're on record now here as being a fan of The Last Jedi. So for you, as a fan of Luke Skywalker, how do you believe his behavior in 8 would, based off not just what we saw in the movies, but taking all maybe Legends material, extra, everything in the books and comics. Do you believe that his character in Episode 8 is a good culmination of what we knew of him as a character before that? And are you pleased with the arc of Luke Skywalker?
And Brad putting Trevor on the hot seat.
So, a couple of things. The first one is that they are not the same character. They're the same character up until the end of Return of the Jedi, because at that point the timeline splits two different ways. You have Legends and you have canon. So the events and the circumstances of that character's life are completely different by the time you get to 35 years after the Battle of Yavin in either timeline. At that point, they are very different characters. They were the same character at the end of Return of the Jedi, which is the last point we saw that character on screen. Then you have the Legends Luke and the canon Luke. Different things happened to them. They went through a very different life at that point. So you can't make an assumption that the Legends Luke would have acted in that way, because they've lived a different life by that point.
Sure.
When it comes down to talking about the hubris of the Jedi and all of that, and that moment of weakness that he showed in the flashbacks, which again we see it from 3 different points of view in that movie. So even then, we're dealing with a lot of unreliable narrators. So even us as the viewer can't 100% sure we know exactly what went down that night, because we've been told so many conflicting versions. For the events of that night with Ben Solo to lead to Luke's self-imposed exile, I can completely get that. I think it's the perfect arc for the Luke Skywalker we had. It would have been great to see the kick-ass Super Jedi Luke Skywalker go around, but would it have been as satisfying? I don't know. I really don't know. That scene with Luke and Yoda in Last Jedi will make me cry every single time. I can't ask for much more.
Sure.
Does that answer your question?
Oh yeah. Now I just want to hang out in a pub with you and drink and talk about Star Wars ad nauseum. Yeah.
I mean, that's what we all do, right? That's why
Exactly.
we're all in it, because we can talk it and we can discuss it, and we're not always going to agree. But so my best friend, for example, refuses to watch Andor, mostly because it winds me up. But he just refuses to watch it because it's not. He knows it's not going to be a thing, and he's not even going to. And that's my best friend. So if we can have those conversations, then strangers can have these conversations without getting annoyed, without resorting to saying that someone's opinion is wrong. There is no right or wrong opinion. It's just your enjoyment.
Yeah, and it's funny. We have a phrase here: hashtag enjoy Star Wars responsibly. And it's funny because as fans, we always Brad and I always talk with other folks about how we perceive other people's opinions about something or one aspect of the franchise that we love. It gets so personal, and I think it's because we are passionate about this galaxy far, far away. And it's for a lot of people, it may be difficult to kind of separate the the essence of why you like it and the puzzlement as why someone else might have a different opinion. It's unfortunate that people cross that line, but always here on the Scarif podcast, we love to just talk about why it is that we like stuff or not like stuff. And again, we talked about Star Wars being a family, but the fandom certainly is. We obviously know some folks that get a little carried away, but we love talking to fans about anything, even hubris.
Yes. I mean, Ro and I have, remarked many times that we are not big fans of The Last Jedi, to say the least. But at the same time, you articulated perfectly why you are a fan and why you do like the arc of Luke Skywalker, and I love that. So
yeah, no, I can see people's point of view. I really can. Like,
yeah,
my same friend who doesn't like Andor, it's not his favorite movie, and we just kind of argue about it all the time. And I can see people's viewpoints, but to me it was perfect, and it was also that that ambition, that boldness, that braveness. I didn't want to see The Force Awakens a second time. I didn't need that. So I didn't want to see. It was bad enough seeing a third Death Star. I didn't want to see a fourth.
Right.
So you didn't want to see the First Order Strikes Back?
Exactly.
Well, all right, I'll take that. So, what do you want people to know about your book? Why should we be reading this book?
This book, first thing to know is it's thick.
Yeah,
it's a chunky book.
I was going to ask. It has to be.
And listen, this book is not this. This probably doesn't help my cause. This book is not for the newbie. It's not for someone trying to dip their toe into Legends. It's not a reading order. Please don't try and read the books in the way this is set out. It will drive you insane. You'll need 10 different media any one time and flicking back and forth between them. It is for people who already know Legends to go back in and kind of see a new light on it and go, well, I didn't know that story interacted with this one. I didn't know that there are all these vignettes in the Truce at Bakura source book that happen during the events of the Truce at Bakura book, that I could stop on this chapter and read this and get a little bit more of the picture. It's for those people. If you really want to know, it's as much for people who want to discover where all these other stories are that they didn't know exist, as much it is for people who want to dive into the timeline deeper. And that, I think that's what I'm proudest of. There's not a single Star Wars story ever written that isn't in here if it contains a narrative. So, I'm not going to include every single adaptation because that's nuts. I mean, just tell a story that we've seen on screen. But every original Star Wars story has been noted in this book.
I'm probably not going to like you too much after I finish reading it, because I will discover how much I don't know about Star Wars, and I don't think I want to know that. I consider myself one of the biggest fans out there, but I don't. I'm sure you're familiar with that. There's that book where it's multiple choice. I think it's like So You Think You Know Star Wars or something like that, and it's one of the hardest things ever. I was batting like 50% on there. And I'm like, I'm betting 500 on Star Wars. Like, this is ridiculous. So, I don't know. Once I read that thing, I figure out how much I don't know. I don't know.
But there's a lot. It is a lot. I mean, by my conservative count, I've included over 1,500 different stories.
Oof. Wow.
That's not books, but for example, that may include a comic book arc or a short story here or a video game here. But there really are that many.
Mm-hmm.
God bless.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Star Wars is a wonderful tapestry of narratives that have been strung together in such a way that, well, obviously, that is fantastic for fans. I mean, the interconnectivity of the stories really is such an impressive piece of work, whether it was done by accident, which I think, originally it was, but now there's so many stories and things like that to kind of, weave through the timeline of Star Wars. It's amazing and daunting, like I said early on, to think about that. Such amazing work. I'm definitely gonna head on out to my local bookstore and maybe we'll do a giveaway. Chat. Absolutely. Brad, any final thoughts?
Again, I'm just so happy we had this conversation. Not just about the book, but all your thoughts in general about Star Wars. Is always great to meet somebody new, talk to somebody new about the thing that we love so much. And I really respect your opinions on it. And I can't wait to get my hands on that book and tear through it.
No,
Excellent.
thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Trevor, why don't you tell the folks that are watching where people can contact you to say hello there?
So you can find me on Twitter. I'm at Davey Todd, DAVEYTOD. I'm the same on Reddit and Substack, which is where you'll find my super detailed canon timeline, which maybe one day I'll put in print. And if you want to check the book out, then it's the definitive Star Wars Legends timeline on Amazon.
Perfect. Beautiful.
I'll be doing that right now.
Yes, exactly.
It's available as paperback and Kindle on Amazon. I am working on a hardback, simply because so many people have asked for it. So that may be in the pipeline too.
That would be
And
great.
I'm sure I can find space for it back here. Excellent. Trevor, thank you so much. And chat, thank you guys so much for hanging out with us. Brad, why don't you close us out? May the force be with you all.
As you said, enjoy Star Wars responsibly. There's a lot of it. And that's the Scuttlebutt.
Take care, fellas.